Could you tell us your name and what year you were born?
Yes, I'm called Mary Oldrid and I was born in 1932.
Were you born in Doncaster, Mary?
No, I was born at Bolton in Lancashire.
So how old would you be when the war started then?
7.
And can you remember it as a child?
Oh yes, easily.
Were you issued with a gas mask?
Yes, they issued gas masks from my Sunday school. And I remember being horrified by the commotion in the Sunday school because it had been a quiet and peaceful kind of place. And all of a sudden there were all these people stamping in and waiting for gas masks and passing round rumours about what it would be like to be gassed. And of course babies had to have special ones, and so there was a lot of commotion about putting babies into these special respirators that they had. And altogether I really rather resented them coming to my Sunday school and behaving like that.
And did you have to carry it with you all the time?
Oh yes, and it was in a stout cardboard box with string round it so that you could hold it over your shoulder or across your chest. And we had to take it to school and put it on the back of our chair. And even if we went into the schoolyard at playtime, we had to take it with us.
Did you have gas mask drill?
Oh, we did, yes. And that was horrible. The nasty thing about gas masks was that they smelled so rubbery, and you really felt as though you'd never breathe properly again once you get your nose into that thing, and then you get the straps over your head. It was a horrible feeling. But we had to do it. But it did have its upside because I was a nosy little 7-year-old. And it was one way of finding out where everybody lived, because you had your name and address on this box. So you could go around looking to see where people lived. Especially the boys, because they were very secretive about it.
And did you have, at school also, did you have an air raid shelter?
Oh, we did, yes. And that was awful because during the time it was being constructed, we couldn't go to school full time. We had to go in shifts. And unfortunately, I could never remember which shift I was on. And so it was quite often that I got to school and the schoolyard was empty and I had to sort of go trailing in on my own. And of course, they didn't hesitate to smack you in those days, you know.
And again, did you have drills of practice getting into the air raid
Yes,
shelter?
yes.
What was that like?
Well, at the time we had the shelter, we had a male teacher. It was after 1939, of course. I'm talking about 42 now. And to make sure, he was in charge of what was going on in the shelters. So he had to leave the class quite often. And so he used to make us say multiplication tables out loud so that he could hear us all the way down through the schoolyard towards the shelter, and he knew where we had to be up to by the time he came back, so we weren't wasting time. And so when it was all constructed, yes, we had to go in and practice what we would do if we needed to go out because of a raid. And it was a question of climbing some steps and then climbing down some more steps and turning to the left and following your leader until somebody shouted halt. And then you found a niche in the wall which was damp and smelled rather damp concrete-ish. But then the good thing was that the school had a supply of Horlicks tablets, and the teacher would come round and give us one each, and then so that sort of helped us along a bit.
And there was a certain young man that...
Oh, Billy Robinson, yes. He had, I don't know what they call them now, you never see them now, but in Bolton we call them ricks, and I think it was 2 pieces of spare rib, and they were bleached. And they used to sort of put them between the fingers and they could make a good tune with them. So Billy used to make a tune and we used to sing to it. Songs like You Are My Sunshine that were all the rage in the war, with plenty of songs.
This was all re-echoing round the air raid shelter.
Oh, yes.
And did you have an air raid shelter at home as well?
Yes, we did. It was a brick one. It was in the backyard. Excuse me. There was a square part of it that was built with loose bricks that hadn't been mortared in, and we had an iron sort of bar that we could put in these bricks and turn it so that the bricks would fall out if we were ever trapped in there, but it never happened, thank goodness.
So was it an Anderson shelter?
No, I don't know what they called them. It wasn't an Anderson shelter and it wasn't a Morrison shelter, it was just a brick shelter.
And did you ever have to use it?
Oh yes, we used it often. We were often involved in air raids, especially at night time because we were so near to Manchester.
Can you remember that, getting up at
Oh
night?
yes, I can well, it was a bit of a joke in the family because I'd be fast asleep and I'd be vaguely conscious of my dad putting the eider down round me to make like a big sausage parcel and then picking me out of bed and carrying me down the stairs and then through the living room and then through the kitchen and then down 3 steps, and then he turned right, and just before we got to the door of the shelter we had a wash house and there was a downspout from it, and he used to crack my head on the downspout. And ever after that, my mother always thought my lack of intelligence was due to the number of times I'd had my head smoten in.
Oh dear. So you were always crying by the time
the time we got there, yeah.
Oh dear me. Did you ever have any evacuees in Bolton?
Oh, well, we had them in Bolton, but we went to try to get some, but they wouldn't come with us because they wanted to stay as families. And most of them had a lot of children. I remember going to this big schoolyard and there were little groups of families, not fathers, but the mothers, with some of them as many as 7 or 8 children, and they wouldn't be split up. And so we went round to all the groups and said we could take one little girl, it would be all we had room for, but they all refused.
They wouldn't want to split them up, would
no,
they?
they didn't. They were keen to stay together.
Yes, yes. So the story you told me about the child and the Red Indians.
Oh, that happened in Doncaster. That was a friend of mine in Doncaster.
Can you tell us that?
Oh yes, I thought that was so funny because she lived at Carcroft, and they had relatives in the south of England, in Kent. And they had a letter from one of them saying that they would like the boy to come to Doncaster for the duration of the war so that he'd be safe. And he came into a family of girls and they weren't very keen, and he wasn't very keen really. So one Sunday they went for quite a long walk round Ouston. Do you know Ouston Church?
Yes.
And the guides, of course, had a permanent campsite there, and it was walled. There was a high wall round it, and there were some bell tents in that field at that time, and so the boy could see the tops of the tents from the other side of the wall, and he said, you know, what are they, who's in there? And the girls said, Indians, and they come out at night and scalp you. And so he wrote to home and said, you know, please could he go home? It thought it'd be safer at home than in Doncaster.
Oh dear. So you didn't have any evacuees, but your mother did help in some way in the war, didn't she? Because you told me about her making these snoods. So could you tell us about that?
Well, yes, because there was a munitions factory just a bus ride away from my home, a big one.
Could you tell us what a munitions factory is?
Yes, they were making bullets and bombs and everything that the Army and the Navy and the Air Force needed to win the war effort. And it was mostly manned by women. And there wasn't much by way of health and safety in those days, they had no coverings for the hands as far as I know. But they did have a rule that said that they had to keep the hair out of the way, because of course if they'd bent over and got it stuck in the machinery, they would have been scalped like the evacuee. And so they, you see, you would have thought that girls would have had short hair, but they didn't, because one great comfort during the war was the films that we got from America. And the girls in the films were very glamorous, and they all had very long hair. And so girls wanted to be like them, so they had very long hair. And so they had to have a means of keeping this lovely long hair out of the way. So some of them wore a turban, and that was, I've brought one actually, well, a scarf that makes into a turban, and it just sort of becomes triangular, and then it sort of goes over your head like that. And women became very attached to these during the war. In fact, they wore them when they didn't need to. But the more glamorous option was the snood, which is, this is a little bit like one, because I can't crochet, but my mother could. And if she'd seen this, she'd have told me to take every last stitch of it out and start again. But she could make 6 of these in an evening. And so girls at the munitions factory told each other, and there'd be a knock at the front door, and it would be a girl standing there with a ball of wool in her hand, saying, "Will Mrs. Chase please make me a snood?" Which was bad news for me, because my mother then would say, "You'll have to wash up after tea, I've got a snood to make." And then when the girls came back for them, my mum didn't need money or anything from them, but you know, they would bring something like a teaspoonful of tea wrapped in a bit of newspaper, or 1 egg, or even 1 chocolate. And of course my mother was delighted to have them, but it wasn't necessary. But I suppose the girls just wanted to feel that they'd paid something for it.
Yes, and we've got a picture here, haven't we, of one of the young girls that...
in the school, yes, yes.
So we'll just show that to the camera. We needed somebody with long hair,
yes,
didn't we?
they had to have long hair, and it had to be sort of all bundled away safely. And then I'm afraid we've not made such a good job with that bow. They used to end up with quite a flattering bow on top of the head.
Yeah. And that brings in about the rations, doesn't it, Mary? Because obviously 1 egg and 1 teaspoonful of tea was quite a precious commodity.
Yes.
Because of the rationing.
Very much so,
and,
yes.
Is there anything that, you know, you can remember about rationing that...
Well, I can remember my mother saying that she was glad that rationing started as early as it did, because she could remember the First War when they'd been very, very late with rationing, and it had become very unfair because people with money could afford to buy food on the black market that ordinary people couldn't possibly afford. So when we were issued with the ration books, we thought it was fair and square for all. It did, in fact, it's only over since I've been working with you, talking about World War II, that I've really realised that it was a bit the same during the last war, because restaurants were still open. And I'd never realised, because we were too poor to go into restaurants, but people, I think there was a limit on the amount they could spend on a meal. I think it was something like 5 shillings or something like that. But it did mean that people who had more money could buy more food because they could go into a restaurant. But we didn't do that sort of thing, only on high days and holidays, which were fairly few and far between.
So did you ever go and do the shopping for Mother?
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, I was in terrible trouble once when I was 13, and I had a Burberry raincoat for school, And my mother put £0.50 in this raincoat pocket, and she said, if you see a queue, get in it and buy what they have. And I did. This queue went all round the corner from a shop and along a street and down another corner, round another corner. And I stood there, and then I was issued for £0.50. It was exactly £0.50. And it was a thin, beautiful, thin box, cardboard box. And I took it home to my mother, and she opened it, and it was Thermogene, and nobody had a bad chest. And I was in such trouble about that.
Yes, oh dear. You better explain what Thermogene is.
Oh, well, Thermogene is a wadding. It's like thick, fleecy, and it's impregnated with some kind of medication that people with bad chests used to put it on the chest and get the warmth from the Thermogene, and they were supposed to cure all kinds of complaints.
What did your father do during the war?
Well, he worked in a cotton mill, and so it was a reserved occupation because they were spinning yarn to make uniforms.
Oh, yes, of course.
And but he had to be on a fire watch rota as well, and that came pretty often. I used to hate it when he was out at night. You know, I didn't know whether he was safe or not. And they had to patrol round the mill because, of course, if an incendiary bomb had hit the mill and set it on fire, it would have been a disaster.
And apparently you visited London as well during the war.
I did, yes.
Could you tell us about that? Because
Well,
that was quite a
yes.
frightening experience.
Yes, it was. It was. Oh, it's no good. I don't suppose this photograph would show up, but I did bring it because there aren't many people who have a photograph of a London wedding in 1942, the day after.
Just show it so that the camera can see.
Can you see that? It was my mother's sister who was a nurse, and she was working in London all through the Blitz, and she got married, and you'd wonder why he wasn't in uniform, the bridegroom, but he was a builder, and I think he made a lot of money during the war because he was working 20 hours a day, because when they had the Blitz, of course, he was shoring up buildings and trying to make premises usable again. And you notice that his sister came in a turban. and that's me at the end. And you can see that we still had our bits of fashion during the war, because RAF pilots used to wear flying gloves, and there was a big craze for flying gloves. Everybody wanted some flying gloves, and I'd obviously got mine for Christmas, but slightly before time.
So you were in London for the wedding?
Yes.
And
well, the night before the wedding, my cousin Ken, 10 years older than I was, and he was in the RAF, and he suggested that we should go to the pictures. And whilst we were in there, the lights went on, and the manager came onto the stage and said that enemy bombs were approaching, and he advised us all to leave the cinema and seek shelter. And we were with Ken's friend and his girlfriend, and I can remember coming out of the cinema, and the girl gave me a little Bakelite brooch, which was a Bambi, because the Bambi film had come out just then. And I can remember Ken saying, I'm not going into a shelter with her, I'm going to get her home, they'll be going mad wondering what's happened to us. And so we did. And it was very dangerous. Things were, wood was dropping onto the pavement in front of us, and we were having to run round it, and it was pretty frightening, really. But we all looked fairly tidy for the wedding the day after.
So the bombs were actually dropping around
Oh,
you
yes.
as you were running home?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it was quite an experience,
Yes,
really.
yes. We've just got 2 minutes left, Mary, to say a little bit about the Royal Army Veterinary Corps in Doncaster. Can you explain what we did about that?
Well, I did, yes, because we were interested in what all the horses were doing in Doncaster. Everybody knew that Doncaster was full of horses, but nobody knew why. And so we decided to find out. And it was highly secret, and so there was nothing to be had in the archives or the library. And so we wrote to the Saga magazine, guessing that the people who'd been in Doncaster were now spread out all over the country, and we were right, because didn't we get a lot of replies? And they told us of their experiences, and it seems Doncaster was called, it was the depot, and every horse that was trained to go into the war was trained in Doncaster. And I've often thought that Doncaster should take a bit more credit for that.
That's right. And we got some photographs sent as well, didn't we?
Yes, we did, yes.
Lady.
Yes.
Of these horses being marched
Yes.
to the race course
Yes.
and out to Rossington.
Yes, and they said that 600 mules had been, wild mules had been caught on the prairies in Canada and brought by boat, by ship, to Liverpool and put in trains to Doncaster, and then taken from Doncaster to Rossington. And they said that they only went mad when they were actually in fresh air again in Rossington. But they managed, the poor things had to go into the jungle in the Far East. They used to take ammunition in and bring wounded men out. So they did a wonderful job.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mary, for coming and recalling all these stories for us. It's
Well,
been really interesting.
It's my pleasure. It's nice that they're not lost, isn't it?
Yes, it is.